Michelle, you had something?
No, I'm just thinking about the second question here. His manner was like all the powerless black people I'd ever known, exaggerating their bodies to conceal a fundamental plunder that they could not prevent. What do you believe Coates meant by this statement? Well, certainly he was talking about the way the whole mortgage industry uh, had been geared
Right.
to set black people up in housing situations that they really could not afford, so that sooner or later
The default.
they would lose their home, they would lose their house. Um, that that was the design of the system, and so that's the fundamental plunder that they could not prevent. And a part of the reason that they could not prevent it was because they didn't know about it.
That's it.
They Venita has heard me say on many occasions in our other reading group that those were naive times, you know. Um, Naive not because the people were stupid, um, but because we just really did not have access to the information that we needed to understand the tactics that were being used against us.
Right.
There hadn't been all of the exposés and widespread economic crises, and we didn't know how deep was the rabbit hole.
Right.
And so certainly in the period that Coates is looking at, I think that was a big part of the problem. That's why you couldn't prevent, you couldn't prevent this theft. The other part of it, I think is something you said previously, Dean, about when we were talking about education and how we don't. I remember you saying something about they don't teach us about tax law, but we don't come with a history of home ownership and knowledge that is just passed on to our children as a part of their birthright. And so, when we go into those markets, we're babes in the woods, bound to be taken advantage of by wolves.
Right.
So his manner was like all the powerless black people I'd ever known. To me is that kind of innocence. Like you don't even know what's being done to you.
So first of all, let me say nobody has to be stupid to run into big government corruption.
Yeah.
Big government conspiracy. That doesn't require you to be dumb. That requires them to be evil.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take away anything on our part to be the victim of a big government conspiracy. Like they set that up intentionally to move pieces on the chessboard around in their favor. And we just
and they're still doing it. When you look at the patterns of gentrification that are going on now, those are planned decisions that are being facilitated.
Right. Masterfully being facilitated. And we don't have anybody on our side that really tells us the moves that are being made so we can really get ourselves out from underneath of it. Like we may see that it's big gentrification, but then you need a plan. You need a plan to do something about it, and you need resources. You need banks and people on your side to really change that type of system, and that's not always the easiest to come about, and it leaves us feeling ashamed. It's like the system is set up to make us doubt ourselves, even though there is a conspiracy behind us. You know, it comes off like
Venita used to be in real estate. Let's hear what
it comes off like a cliche when people say that they're out to get me. But if they're really out to get you, is it really your fault?
Right.
No.
Well, remember when Coates said, something about racism can just as easily cause delusion as it can,
Right.
nobleness.
Right.
Yeah, you doubt yourself. You don't even know.
You doubt yourself, and then you end up feeling blameful, blaming yourself for a system designed to do just that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's nefariously set up that no one else. That it's like you're chasing ghosts to try to figure out what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
That is a masterful setup.
Well, as Din Goldson would say, Venita, what you got?
Well, I was in the real estate business for about 12 years, so I've seen it all. And no, you cannot protect yourself from a game if you don't know what the game is.
Right.
That's the first thing. The second thing is, for a long time, it was blamed on all the poor people that had, that their homes were underwater, and that no. A lot of folks blamed it on the bank or blamed it on the individual. No. The bank was part to blame. Part was individual. Realtors, mortgage brokers. It was a whole fleet of people that was involved in the things that happened. And the majority of the folks that bought the banks down, I should say, with all the underwater mortgages, were not the poor whites or poor blacks or poor period. It was the middle class, educated white folks. See, we were looking for homes out of need. They were looking for homes out of greed. Most of them were second and third time home buyers. They were very versed about home buying. Middle class white folks, that I should say. They wanted bigger. Then when the values went up a ridiculous amount, I mean, it was just like, common sense would dictate to most folks that the home's property value does not double in 3 months. Nothing doubles in 3 months in life, period. Except grief. That will double in 3 months. So when you had a home that went from $300,000 and suddenly it's worth $700,000, well, those same people that were doing it out of greed said, well, okay, I have all this equity, John. So now I'll go out and I'll take the equity out and I'll buy the big BMW 7 Series. I'll buy the boat and the summer home. And then suddenly the market crashed. So, a lot of folks were victims. And I would say especially poor people. And what I mean by poor, that was anyone that was poor. Whether they were black or white, I can say they were victimized because it was so complicated. And when you're doing something out of need and you're not educated about what you're doing on top of that, what happens?
You're going to make a lot of mistakes.
People that's in front of you to do the right thing for you.
And so, Venita, you're talking about, the economic crises of our modern era of this century. But Coates is talking about what was going on like in the 50s and 60s.
It's similar. Nothing has changed. The same thing was going on in the 80s and in the 90s when we had our deep recessions. Was going on in the 40s and the 50s. You were buying paper that was already read. You really didn't own your home then. And they knew you would never own your home. That was the plan. The plan was to give you exorbitant interest rates, charge more money than they would charge, I would say, a Caucasian person. Then they had clauses in the real estate contract where actually, you know, you never owned that home.
Really?
And because the interest rates were so absorbent back then, you look at interest rates at one point there was 21, 22, and 23%.
They would balloon your interest rates?
Balloon your interest rates. The instruments that you had in front of you, then, you know, black folk didn't know about or didn't have access to legal representation, where you would get a lawyer and you sit down and they would go through everything with you. So all these little things were missed for them. So all of a sudden they would, you know, call that note out of nowhere. And of course you don't have, I said the average home might have been, good house, $3,000 to $7,000. That was a good house in the city. And they would call that note, you didn't have the money. They would come and foreclose on your property, set you out in the street, turn around and resell that property to the next person. And you had no way of knowing that. And that actually, history repeats itself. It just looked prettier in the 80s and the 90s. Let's put it that way. You know, I mean, our country has a way of prettying everything up anyway. So they just made it look prettier. So I can't really fault the banks. Banks are opportunists. They're big business. They're there to turn a profit. If they can only turn that profit on you for 3 years at an interest rate that's more exorbitant than the average interest rate, think about it. If the average interest rate is 6% and they're getting 14 from you,
right?
Well, even if you can only pay it for 3 years, if a person's paying 6%, that's what? 8 years, 7 years worth of time, money they actually collected because your interest rate is that much, you know, higher than the rest. So it's a lot of tricks to the trade. And unfortunately, in black families, we even today,
we don't know those tricks.
Well, it's not the point of know the tricks, but finances is something that a lot of black families that I've run into don't teach their children about finances because they don't know about finances.
Right.
Which is not a huge excuse today because we have a lot of resources. You know what I'm saying? When I built my home, I didn't have the internet. There was a stack of papers that high from the bank. You know, now you have the internet. You have seminars that you can attend, pre-home buyer seminars. You have access to legal counsel too. So there's a lot of things going on, but it is important. And you, Dean, as a father, you know, of a young child, need to educate yourself. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Right. So that you can teach your son, starting now, how to manage his money, how to manage his finances, how to invest properly. Because it's very important. It really is. For our long-term wealth. Right. It's important. I'm sorry I was long-winded.
Oh, you're good.